Okay, so this is hopefully going to be fun and something that I promised a week ago, which was that I'd hit 30,000 subscribers. I said I'd make a question and answer video, which can be very tedious, can't they? Let's make sure that this one isn't. But I think the last question and answer video I made was at about 10,000 subscribers, like fucking 80 years ago or something. Right, so I'm kind of due making one. Well, let me say in the meantime, if you go and have a look at my subscriber count, you'll see that barely a week has gone by and I'm way over 30,000. I'm about 32,000 at the time of making this, and that is thanks to Dark Matter, who I did a bit of a collab on his video, his latest video, and you can see me immortalised there in one of his drawings, and also hear my wonderful dulcet tones there. And so thank you for that, and also for the wonderfully kind things that Dark Matter said. Let me also say, because this is a question and answer video, so this is the first question maybe to answer, which was there was a number of people that subscribed as a result of that. I said, I hope you don't turn out to be another Steve Shives, because quite famously, Dark Matter endorsed Steve Shives before he kind of went somewhat off the rails, and so I kind of found that laughable, and in terms of obviously these people really genuinely are subbing, not knowing very much about me, if they think I'm going to turn into another Steve Shives. Somebody shoot me if that happens, please. I haven't got very much in common with Steve Shives, and I don't mean in terms of my criticisms of Steve Shives. I have some criticisms about his very, very hardline progressive stances, which seem way over the top, and the way that he denounces people and the language he uses. But the big differential between me and Steve Shives is the way that we view people with opposing opinions. You could not be more diametrically different than the Steve Shives of today and how I am. So don't worry about that. But thank you for Dark Matter, especially given the experience with Steve Shives. I don't think there's any point me giving Dark Matter a shout back, given the size of his channel is 20 times the size of my channel. But what I will do is just to make you aware, Dark Matter has a second channel. One of the disadvantages of doing the kind of thing that he does is that you have this audience of 600,000 people, but you can't always, there might be a burning topic you want to talk about, but you can't because you're confined by the strictures of what you do with your material. And wonderful as his material is, it's in a particular sphere there. He has a blogging channel called Dark Antics, which you might not be aware of. I think that only has about 50,000 subscribers. If you're not aware of that, he doesn't blog on that as often as he ought to. Naughty Dark Matter. But when he does, it's really worth listening to. So go and have a give him a subscribe on his Dark Antics channel if you haven't. What I will say about Dark Matter is that always obviously gets a lot of praise for his cartoons themselves and his the whole style of it, and that is wonderful. But I don't think he always gets enough credit for some of the scripts that he comes up with. And I remember a few years ago now, I'd made a video called Why Donald Rumsfeld Disproves God is what the video was called. And it was about, effectively it was about global skepticism, and it alluded to Donald Rumsfeld and his known unknowns versus unknown unknowns. And I was making the claim that there's no such thing. You can't actually ever claim to be omniscient because you can never rule out those unknown unknowns, and even a deity, because by their very nature they can't be ruled out. You can't rule out the possibility of unknown unknowns, so you can never claim genuine omniscience. But then I evidence that at the end of the video, because people immediately think, well, how could that manifest in terms of a God? With the idea of a God's God, that the God of Christianity, the Abrahamic God, Yahweh, could have been created by another God who'd created Yahweh, naive, erroneously believing themselves to be omniscient and omnipotent and uncreated, when in actual fact they were. There's nothing logically to preclude that. And so from the perspective of a Christian, there's no way that a Christian could discern between what they would think of as a genuine ultimate God and a God that's labouring under a misapprehension. Dark Matter watched that video, and he made a video as a result of that called God's God, and very kindly left a little note in the footnote to say this is what it was based on. But I didn't even warrant that footnote, because when I watched his video, he took what I'd done and not just expanded on it, but he'd done that. Right, he took that little idea and then created something absolutely marvellous that had gone way behind that which I could have even imagined. It's a wonderful video that he made out of that, and that takes an incredible amount of creativity, and you can have all the artistic ability to do the cartoons in the world. If you can't do that, then you couldn't be successful in the way he has. Okay, that's enough smoke blown up Dark Matter's arse. But there's a genuine point there. Okay, on to some of these questions. I'm going to try and fucking rattle through these bastards. Right, this isn't going to be your normal Q&A video. He says, probably won't work out that way, but let's have a go. Okay, starting from the first that was left. I won't go through them all in this video, but let's see how far we get. Tell us what you think of Steve Shive's silence on TAC now that it's been officially cancelled after he shilled the fuck out of it. Yes, we're starting with Steve Shives. That's good, isn't it, given what we were talking about a minute ago. I agree with that, really. I understand if you've talked about something and it's cancelled, it's a bit embarrassing. I can understand not wanting to mention it again. But really, you've got to bite the bullet. Just get it over with. Just say, yeah, look, I'll tell you what, I've been building this thing up. It's all fallen through. Some of the things that happened were a little bit shady. Have a little bit of a talk about it. Draw a line under it. Don't just pretend like it hasn't happened. Really, because that looks like you're part of the shadiness. And I know Morally Grey made a video on this and he kind of blamed Steve Shives, and I thought that was a little bit unwarranted, actually. Having spoken, of course, to Lee Munn, having spoken to some of the people since that have been involved in this all falling to pieces, I think it's unfair. From our perspective, Steve Shives and his panel seemed like a large chunk of it, but there was actually so many other things that were messed up, and I think they actually played a bigger part in the downfall. Issues, though, I had with Steve Shives' YouTube panel, I don't think that's what contributed to the downfall to it. Cake or pie? Pie. Do you think Brexit will happen? Yes. Would you rather have penis-sized nipples or a nipple-sized penis? There's some fucking... You get to realise the intellectual level of your subspace, don't you? Penis-sized nipples, because... you can soon have an operation to have them reduced to a more normal, and these are normal-sized nipples we've got. I'm not going to show you my penis to prove on that one, but you could soon have an operation to reduce the size of your nipples much easier than you could to increase the size of your penis. Okay. I suppose a clever answer would have been, what? So are your nipples supposed to be a different size from your penis or something like that? Congrats, lad. Are you still brewing your own beer? No, I've still got all the equipment, but I haven't brewed for a while, but I've got quite a collection of single malts now. Where do you see the human race in 500 years? Sometimes somebody asks you a question, and the only honest answer you can give is, I haven't got a fucking clue. My answer to that question is, I haven't got a fucking clue. Seriously, I haven't. What are your thoughts on misanthropy? Misanthropy. You're a misanthrope. Misanthropy. What are your thoughts on misanthropy? I've been called a misanthrope on many occasions, and it bugs the shit out of me. Okay, well, I'll take that second part. Your word. What are my thoughts on it? I think it's easy to conflate two things. I have quite a cynical perspective on human beings. That would explain why on some issues I'm sort of centre left, others I'm centre right. I'm centre right because of that. I expect people will try and game systems. People are not generally honest. If they can get away with it, they'll try and get a little bit more. So you have to have checks and balances. I think it's a Thomas Sowell thing, this idea that left-wing politics tends to be based on the idea that people are honest. And right-wing politics on the idea that people are not. So that's why you can have things in competition with one another in terms of companies, because then that keeps each other... Well, the dishonesty bounces against one another effectively, whereas if you have monopolies, they'll just fucking skank everybody, and of course a state-run thing is a monopoly. Whereas with individuals, you need some regulations, because otherwise people will cheat the system. They'll claim things that they shouldn't be able to claim. So I've got a cynical perspective on people en masse. When you have enough people en masse, there will be enough people to fuck anything up that you try and achieve without having rules and regulations in place. But as to being a misanthrope, that's maybe a level of cynicism. I think there are redeeming characteristics about us as well, and we can obviously achieve marvellous things, and people do marvellous acts of altruism as well. So, those are maybe my thoughts on misanthropy. Burning question, is it correct that firefighters do not like to eat roast pork or crackling? Never fucking heard anybody say that in my life. I've heard it suggested that burning flesh smells a little bit like roast pork. I've only smelt it a couple of times, really, because normally you've got a BA set on. It does a bit, but it's never put me off burning. It's never put me off roast pork or crackling, really. Any anecdotal evidence? No, because I don't think it's true. Okay. Let's have a look. That isn't a question. Badass Noel, well done. Roll on 30k per video on Patreon. Well, I'm a little bit off 30k, but if you're offering to make a pledge of $29,500 per video, then I wouldn't knock you back for it. EO Thorn, and there was another one. I know there was another one on woodchucks. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? And then one of them says, assuming rudimentary opposable thumbs and sentience, or at least awareness. I'm pleased they clarified that, right? Otherwise, it would be a ludicrous question, wouldn't it? I think a woodchuck is a kind of medium-sized rodent, if I'm not mistaken. I wouldn't think a woodchuck could chuck very much wood. Certainly it wouldn't be a very efficient chucker of wood. Nowadays, with the technology that we have, we could create devices that could, just the same as we have devices that can produce thousands of horsepower and replace the horse in terms of generating electricity. I propose that there are better mechanisms that we can produce for throwing wood than by employing woodchucks. I don't think that answers your question, but that's the answer I'm giving. I ought to be a fucking politician, didn't I? In our culture, spiritual feelings are rather ill-defined, immature, and sometimes malformed. Whether it's true or not, is shaming people for their spiritual feelings that you perceive as irrational a moral good or moral bad? I don't think it's a moral question, but I don't think there's any point shaming people for their spiritual feelings. If they've just got some spiritual feeling that isn't impacting on anybody else, then let them crack on with it, And I'm not entirely averse to spirituality. There are some aspects of spirituality which, when you draw away all the bollocks, right? Meditation, for example, exploring that kind of inner headspace that you have. I don't have a problem with that. That's perhaps a useful exercise to have. So I'm not entirely against that kind of thing. Brian J. 1962, I know a long time. Several of these people are quite long time commenters. Kind of thrown me there, Jim. You're most eloquent and comprehensive in expressing your views on this platform, so all I'm really left to ask is the trivial. So here goes. Who's the Minecraft player in your household? I think that's based upon the light there. The batteries are actually running out. It does lighten up a little bit at the end. It's me. I'm the sad gaming twat in this house. My wife, she's played a bit of Candy Crush Saga or whatever it is, and that's about a limit of the gaming. But I've played quite a bit of Minecraft in the past. Let's have a look. Oh, fucking Jesus. Right, this is a long one. Let's read it out. In the Spencer Sargon Sticks woe stream, it was suggested that identification of race was easy, especially using DNA. Yet I read a report into DNA testing of the Egyptian mummies, which stated, sorry, I'm just checking on the time, that it's very difficult to identify race from DNA as it is a highly complex spectrum and traits differ more within the ethnic groups than between them. So my question is, do you think that it would be feasible to categorically and controversially test people for ethnicity in the foreseeable future? I am not asking about whether you think it is reasonable to do so, but merely whether it would be possible. Well, I'm no expert on this, but what I would say is in terms of testing DNA on Egyptian mummies, there may be particular difficulties with that. But also, of course, it depends upon the ethnic groups that you're comparing it to, because not all ethnic groups are equally diverse from one another. So if you're trying to compare the ethnicity of one ethnic group within the environs of Egypt with other ethnic groups, then you're going to have a bigger problem than if you're comparing it to Asians or Northern Europeans or members of the Khoisan or Mbuti down there, further down in sub-Saharan Africa. So that would be one of the things. There's also this business, of course, that like all of these things are not cut and dried, and people's ethnicity is not cut and dried, but it is for some people. So this is the complexity that we have when we talk about things being sometimes objective and subjective, and there being some grey ground between the two as well. So you could say to me, well, you know, if I was to put some pans of water in front of you, would you be able to tell me whether they're hot or cold, or isn't it really possible? Well, if one of them's a pan of boiling water and one of them's a pan of freezing cold water, then yes, I'll be able to stick my hand in it and tell you in pretty short order. But there will be some temperatures of water in between which I'll have some trouble with. And that's the same with pretty much everything we talk about, and it's the same with these things here. There will be some individuals for whom it is cut and dried. We can find particular genetic markers which in number give us a pretty high degree of confidence as to what their ancestral origins are, their ethnic ancestral origins are. There will be other individuals for which it would be more complicated. I can't really give you any more of an answer than that because I don't know that there is. What's your, EO Thorn, what is your favourite retro game? I tell you what I like. Tecmo World Cup, right? If you've never played Tecmo World Cup, it's shit. You can only go in 8 directions, and there's only like a sort of low pass, high pass, and a shoot, and you'll end up pressing shoot when you want to press pass. But it's just the most awesome fucking 2-player game. You know, you can end up 3 goals down. And it's all, and then all of a sudden you're 4-3 and you've won, and you play that game in a pub with your mates, right? You won't find a pub with it now, unfortunately. I can play it on that, but you won't find it in a pub with your mates. That is an awesome retro game. I always wondered which other names did you consider before settling on Noel Plum? None. Why would I possibly consider any other names? Serious answer to that is none. That is the serious answer. You know, making a YouTube channel username is something that you do in haste and then repent at your leisure because you don't realise. I had no idea I was no idea I was even going to make a video when I started my channel, and it was just a name that I'd used at university. In actual fact, when I did a bit of gaming. And I ended up using it online, actually, as did somebody else, which can be a little bit confusing, but I just stick to the Noel Plum bit because that takes away the confusion. I won't do any more than that. But yeah, so that's where it came from, and if I did it again, I'd come up with something. I wish I didn't have that backstory, because if I did, I've always thought it would be nice to say it to play on nom de plume, right? Because that would sound really intelligent, like I'd given it some thought, but I hadn't. Okay, how can I be more... Raise the Raven, how can I be more British? I don't know how British you are, so I don't know how you could be more British, I've got to say. That's a difficult question. Exiled, hi Exiled, how are you doing? I'd like to know what you think about the current state of Brexit. Well, it's about where I thought it... It's actually a little bit better that we've actually got onto the trade. It's a bit of a... I was a Remainer, right? If I could wave a wand, and it wasn't that I wouldn't want to go against the democratic wishes of everybody, I'd still go for the Remain thing. But the die is cast, and I'm not a Remainer because I just accept that's the way it is. We had the vote. We said it would be based on a majority, which I think is a bit silly for such a momentous decision, but it was, and it went the way it did. And what will happen, this is what I predicted at the time, was that things wouldn't go very well. And that everybody would blame whoever's involved in the negotiations, you know. It's a bit like everybody voting that we all ought to be able to fly to the moon, and then when we can't, we'll blame the government that we've not managed to fly to the fucking moon. Sorting these things out is a lot more complicated than just fucking voting for them. So it was always going to be very, very difficult. Maybe we can get out of it and everything will be great. I hope it is. I'm optimistic about it still, trying to be optimistic about it still. Things aren't going any worse than I thought they would. They're maybe going a little bit better than I thought they would, but it's still a bit of a fucking mess, isn't it? But we always knew it would be, really. John Cole, what's your opinion? Not the BBC's political editor who's now dead, John Cole. No, not that one. That's a terrible impression. Mind you, he's dead, so it's a particularly terrible impression. Just sort of would have been a better impression. What's your opinion on Sargon's idea to start a liberalist movement? Well, all I know, I'll be honest with you, I've not seen the videos or whatever Sargon's done. I don't think I'm betraying a confidence so that Sargon PM'd me and gave me a list of things, and I gave him my comments on those lists where I thought it could be improved and a little bit that I thought he ought to add. Whether he makes any changes, I don't know. But I won't say any more about that than that because that was a private message. But what I will say is that where I differ with Sargon, all these points on this list I thought were decent points. I didn't really... There's none of those points that I thought they weren't reasonable points and weren't general principles that I would generally adopt. But everything he does is from a very, very staunchly individualist over everything else stance. And I'm not entirely on board with that. And I'm not even sure it's entirely consistent with his views. He says it is, and I know he argues against this, but I think that we do give groups rights. And it would be a strange world where we didn't treat people as groups and give them different rights. Really, it would be hard. I understand his desire to see that minimised, and in many respects I would like to see that minimised. I like to see people treated as individuals, and I don't believe that groups should get special treatment because it's not a very meritocratic way of carrying on. But it's an unavoidable fact, right, that you have to give different groups different rights, such as the fact that we give people over the age of 18 the right to vote. We don't give people under the age of 18 the right to vote. We don't give people who have certain mental deficiencies the right to vote, or people that are in prison, incarcerated, the right to vote. We do treat different groups in different ways, and there's myriad examples you could look in the ways in which we do that and that we don't have any problems with. And so you can argue away and say, well, that's justified because of this, that's justified because of that, and of course it is. But when you have that happen so many times, to then wave that away and say, no, we should always treat people as individuals, the groups thing, and group rights doesn't make any sense. Well, yeah, you've just, when there's 100 examples of where they do make sense, I just think it's a little bit dogmatic the way that he sticks to that. So that would be my concern. Not the specific principles so much as I've seen them anyway. What's the question you're surprised you have not been asked yet? That was the one, actually. I was surprised at that point that nobody had asked me what question I'd be surprised that I hadn't been asked yet. But now you've asked it, Spirit Keeper, I can't think of another one. I'd like to know who you voted for in the UK elections in the past. Okay, so I voted for Tony Blair every time I could vote for Tony Blair. I like Tony Blair. The last two times, or would it be the last, because we had a snap election, wouldn't it? The last two times I voted Conservative. I really didn't want, I'll be honest, I really didn't want to vote. I really wanted, rather than Ed Miliband, I wanted his brother, because David Miliband would have been right up my street. Just the same as Tony Blair was right up my street. David Cameron, I know people hate him because he's a Conservative and he's a millionaire. Oh my God, how fucking terrible. But actually on social issues, he was pretty progressive. On economic issues, he was more to the right, so he aligned with me as well. And actually there isn't that much difference between a David Cameron and a Tony Blair. They're both centrist people. Unfortunately, now we've got Jeremy Corbyn, who's more to the left, and that's allowed a Theresa May, who's more traditionally conservative, and things are going downhill a little bit, and I don't really particularly want to vote for either of them, but I just couldn't bring myself to have John McDonnell as fucking Chancellor. That was more of the issue actually than Jeremy Corbyn as leader, so I ended up voting for Theresa May again. But I don't want to see a third Tory term. It's really bad news, I think, because in politics, however staunch your politics is, actually, one truism is that as parties are in power, they do things which don't work. And the way the political system works is you can't admit to it, because if you admit to it, you admit you've made a mistake, and the public won't allow you to do that, and the press won't allow you to do it. They say they will. If only we had politicians that admit their mistakes, but it's bollocks, because as soon as you admit it, they crucify you. So over the years in office, you end up stacking up these schemes and things which really any government would want to drop, but it's not politically expedient to do so. And so you have to sweep it away. You have to put another party in there. And on day one, you see it. You saw it when the Tories took over from Labour. On day one, there was a dozen things which went scrapping that. And to be quite candid with you, I think Labour would have scrapped half of those things as well if politically they'd been allowed to do so, but we kind of handcuff our politicians. So I really don't want to see more Tories. I think we need to swing back, but I'd so much like to see a more centrist Labour leadership that would allow me to vote for them again. Okay, that should tell you everything you need to know. What's your opinion on Geordie Shore? It's shite, man. It's fucking shite, man. Will you be doing more media reviews, video game, reality TV, etc. in the future? That's because I did one on that naked dating show, I think. I might do. I mean, I love video games, but there's people who do magnificent video game reviews, so I don't know whether there's much point me doing it. What's the most robust feminist argument you've encountered? And which video to Christy Winters do you debunk it in? Well, the most robust feminist arguments I wouldn't want to debunk. Right. And the thing is that it's not a case with feminist arguments of 100% good arguments and 100% bad. It's like most arguments. There's a kernel of truth. There's something in there. Take the wage gap, for example. You're portraying a wage gap as 77 cents in a dollar or something like that is obviously very misleading, especially if you then follow it up saying for doing the same work. But there's a kernel of arguments in there. There are things to be concerned about in the way that people are paid, right? There are some issues that we should have some concern over where women seem to be getting the worst end of it. How much that amounts to, I don't know. And just looking at it from outputs isn't necessarily the best way of doing it. It's a way that I err against, but maybe different policies such as blind recruitment policies where it's only at the very last stage of the hurdles where you need to be face to face with people, where you even know whether it's a man or a woman or what they're called or all these different factors, right? So I think there are things that we could do. So again, there's kernels of arguments there. And that's the same in so many different things, but then it's all blown out of proportion. And so then it's either all a load of guff to be debunked, or it all has to be accepted wholesale, and it just doesn't work like that. What I do know with this most robust feminist argument thing, of course, this is a line that my good friend Christy Winters came out with, and where she said, well, people should just look for the most robust feminist arguments. If only she did the same thing herself, rather than spending all her time dwelling on two individuals who she says make the weakest fucking arguments, right? If you're going to spend your YouTube career dwelling on two people that you consider, doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, you consider make the weakest arguments, why wouldn't you allow everybody else to do the same thing in return? What do you think of Oprah Winfrey as a candidate for president in the United States? Absolutely fucking ludicrous idea having Oprah Winfrey as a candidate for the president of the United States, so she'd probably win. I honestly never understood why it takes you so long to get subs. Okay, that isn't a question. Are you a liberalist? I refer you to the earlier answer for that one. Is this one a question here? No. I see Street Fighter Tekken cabinet behind you. Do you like Tekken in general? Yes, I'll let you know Tekken 7 is real fun for competitive play. Yeah, I like Tekken, but I'm not really very good at those fighting games. Right? I'm more of a strategy type of game, you know, that I can pause and fucking spend 5 minutes trying to hit the right bloody joypad buttons or keys or what have you. Actually, I've got this machine here, but I don't think that means I'm very good at sort of Twitch gameplay. What is your view on the whole race debate going on at the moment? Jesus Christ, that's a massive question. I think actually somebody else asked me a question about part of this elsewhere, and I gave a bit of a written response, so I'll give you that. Vernaculus. Hi, Vernaculus. What is the thickest weed you ever smonked? I remember back in university, I lived with a guy who he was spliffing up all the time, and he made this bong out of a demijohn, right? Because we didn't have a lot of money. He made a bong out of a demijohn, and he got the cork, and what he'd used is he'd used 3. Have I got a Bic pen? Yeah. So what he'd done is he'd got a couple of Bic pens and took the inside out and shaved them off. So what he had was, let's think, he had one that went in and then another Bic pen that went down into the tillage space above the water, and then he had another big pen that went down into the water that then connected to a little pipe that went in the end, and then he had a clearing tube, which was another big pen. So he drilled all these holes, put all these in, and so effectively you had a kind of water bong made out of a demijohn and all these big pens. And I'd had the flu with my girlfriend. We'd both been ill. I'd only eaten a banana, I think, over about 4 or 5 days, and he'd got this really sort of soft black resin. He said this is really good stuff. I never smoked it. You know, I never smoked dope. I'd only done it a couple of times, and he said try some of this. And we'd planned on having a night with him, and then we got ill with the flu, and so I just finished the flu, and I'd hardly eaten anything, like I say, for 5 days. And it's like, fuck it, let's do it. It's a stupid thing to do, and fucking hell, I couldn't. After about 20 minutes, I'd like look at the next wall, and then the room would catch up. And you can only take a few minutes of that before you start throwing up. And then eventually I fell asleep on the sofa and woke up about 5 hours later. So that was probably the thickest weed I'd ever smoked. It wasn't actually weed, it was like black. I think that's what he called it, black, like just a black resin. He said it was some of the best stuff he'd ever had, and he'd been... He'd smoked dope since he was 12 years old. His mother had got him onto it, and he tried all sorts. Okay, let's have a look. Next question. Any thoughts on the more intellectual strain of Christianity emerging? Consider, for example, Jordan Peterson and its pushback to the excesses and self-indulgences occurring under the feminist umbrella. Have you thought about where you agree and where you disagree, and what your concerns are with respect to this? Or otherwise, do you find my framing objectionable? Yes, your fucking framing is objectionable. No, not really. My problem with Jordan Peterson with regard to Christianity is that I listened to him several times and I still don't really know what he believes. What I know is he talks about the sort of mythicism and the allegory and all this sort, and he says there's useful truths, there's useful lessons that we can learn. But that doesn't make it any different from Aesop's fables or something like that. And there's many other ways that you can learn these same life lessons. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't speak at all about whether any of these things are true. And surely that's an important factor when we're going beyond something like Aesop's fables or something like that, or The Art of War, or some kind of fucking book, or Confucius's Proverbs or something like that, right? When we're going beyond these kinds of things that tell us how to do things and how to live our lives in different ways. Wisdom literature, a lot of it. When we're going beyond that, when we're claiming deistic existence, then it's kind of an important question whether any of it is factually, materially true, I think. Not just whether it contains truths. So that's my issue with it. Because what you end up with is the same kind of situation with Jordan Peterson as you see with a lot of theologians. Take somebody like Alistair McGrath, who's a big opponent, of course, of Richard Dawkins. If you listen to the way he talks about religion, or the way somebody like Rowan Williams, the ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, talked about Christianity, the high-level intellectual, theological discourse they have is very much at odds with a lot of the people who are the Christians, who are kind of subordinate to them. And I don't mean just the other members of clergy, I mean just the rank and file believers. And so there's this kind of split. And in some ways what they're saying is justifying what these other people believe, but it actually isn't, right? And this is the problem. It's leading people with genuine beliefs that these things are materially true. They're founding it on what these other people are saying, when a lot of the time these other people are talking about sort of spiritual truths and sort of, truths that we can learn from it without it being factually true. So that's the problem that I would have. John Hammond, this isn't a question, but he did say, because my cylinder's gone on my chair, and I mentioned it at the start of the Q&A video, put a Jubilee clip at the top of at the bottom of the bit of the piston that goes into the cylinder. Thank you, that's a really good suggestion. I will do that. The Colonel Clink, why did you start this channel? What motivates you to continue the channel? That's a good question. What started the channel was that I watched some videos on religion and atheism. I'd been interested in these subjects ever since I was a kid. I told my father when I was 6 years old I didn't believe in God. My father was declared it. He regarded himself as an agnostic. He always said keep an open mind to all these things. And even at that point he said, well, you know, don't be too hasty. Think about the different arguments on different... I was fucking 6 years old, but this is the kind of conversations that we had from quite an early age on things. And I was always brought up in that. But that kind of... it's gone through my life, but it was actually about the time of the God delusion that I kind of brought up that interest in having those discussions with other people. And I went on YouTube because that seemed like a venue. It's not something I'd ever used very much, YouTube. And I started going from the videos of clips of people like Richard Dawkins to seeing normal people, everyday people discussing their religion and having these arguments. And at that time you could make video responses. And in the end I'd got this computer, and when I bought my computer, a webcam came with it. I'd never used the webcam, and I thought, do you know what, let's drag it out the cupboard, let's do it out the drawer, let's see if I can set it up. And so I mumbled and fumbled my way through my first couple of response videos, and that was where I started. And then I had periods where I'd have 6 months off YouTube, which didn't do my channel progression. Don't do that, by the way, if you want a big channel. But that's kind of how it went. What motivates you to continue it? That's a bit more complicated, but I'll try and just keep it down to a simple thing. Different things, if I'm being candid. One is that I enjoy it. I love the conversations. I'll get a video that I just cannot wait to sink my teeth into. I've written my notes. I've got bits everywhere. I've got bits that I've dictated onto my phone. I've got bits everywhere. And I just cannot wait to sink my teeth into. And I'm itching to get some camera time. And that's fantastic. And then there's discussions and dramas and exchanges and all these different things. But then there's another side to it, which is that sometimes you lose that enthusiasm, or there's just something that your mind gets drawn to something else, and you'd rather be doing that thing. For me, I might be rather out on my bike in the middle of summer. I might have some family time, or there might be a game that I'm playing, or I might be spending time with my lad doing something, and you get drawn away from it a bit. And being brutally honest, it's Patreon that keeps me going then, because once you start monetizing something and you have a bit of success, this is a side that people don't like to talk about, but it's true. You start to become a bit reliant on that, and so you rely upon keep making your material because it becomes second. For me, as some people, it's their only job, and then you've got to keep going on that treadmill. For me, I can have a month off in the summer and recharge my batteries. That's great. And I can sometimes in the winter I can lower it down a little bit just over Christmas, but you have to keep going with it because you become a little bit dependent on it. That's maybe not a positive in many ways. It might come across as negative or a little bit less palatable. But the good thing for me is it means that I've continuously made videos now since 2014. There's been no gap. And that's good. It's kept my interest. And actually, I'm as interested today as I'm making this video now. I'm as hyped up about the business of making videos and being active on YouTube as probably any other time in the past 10 years. So in that respect, it's a positive, I think. Will Britain's armed forces be nerfed? That's a great word, isn't it? By inclusiveness policies that prize diversity and window dressing over being the best. Yeah, they tried to re-slogan and rebrand the British armed forces. They might be, I don't know. There are so many conflicting forces at work in shaping the armed forces that I just don't know. They are struggling to some extent, I'm told, with numbers and recruitment, which seems strange when the armed forces themselves are actually shrinking. I hope it isn't nerfed by diversity and window dressing. One thing that I talked about recently was the legislation and the exclusion that the armed forces have that nobody else has in the United Kingdom, which is in terms of physical standards. They have an exclusion which allows them to set different standards for different groups, and the reason that that was in place was because they wanted to have male-only units, brutally. But that's changed. That's going. There won't be any male-only units. All roles will be open to everybody. So what I would hope is the reason that legislation was there, or that exclusion was there, was because of a reason that's no longer going to exist. And that reason that was no longer going to exist, male-only units, allowed them to set different entry standards for different groups, which is what they've been doing. They've been setting lower standards for women, lower standards for older people. for doing exactly the same job. You cannot do that anywhere else, any other job in the United Kingdom, including the police, the fire service, etc., etc., other jobs that have physical requirements. So hopefully that legislation will go, and that will nip in the bud one of these things that we have here, which is that potentially you could start. There's nothing to stop the army, as far as I'm aware, in terms of operational tests to get into a particular infantry unit for whatever it is. It's still the same tests at that point for everybody, right? But there's nothing to preclude the army from setting easier tests for women, for example, if they wanted to do that, because they have that exclusion within the legislation. I hope within the next few years that would be closed up. I've got a couple of videos on that, as you know, from a couple of months back, if you want to know more about that. What is your opinion on doctors emigrating to the UK from within and outside the EU? And could you offer your opinion on doctors from Romania doing so in particular? No, I can't offer my opinion on doctors from Romania doing so in particular, because I don't know anything particular about doctors in Romania. It's just a sad fact that we've had to drag in doctors from all over the world. Because it doesn't seem that we can provide enough doctors in this country, which must be something more to do with the way we treat our doctors than the way we pay them, because a GP can earn 100 grand, right? That's a typical kind of wage for a GP, £100,000. What's that, about $140,000? They can earn big bucks. So it must be other factors that are at play, that are turning people off from becoming doctors. So maybe that's something we want to address. The idea of dragging people from lots of these other countries, I find distasteful. Not so much on the immigration front, because I don't like immigration. I do have issues with the amount of people that are coming in with immigration, but it's not the highly skilled people like doctors. My bigger concern is it's where you're taking them from. You're taking them from countries that can ill afford to lose all these fucking doctors. Right? They're having a shortage of doctors because their doctors are coming to work over in countries like the UK. So that's a bit of an issue. What's your view? I'll give it about another 5 minutes and then I'll end this part. What's your view on legal paternal surrender / financial abortion? Oh, this is one I discussed in the dim and distant past. I don't think it's a practical possibility. The equalities people, people who are equality at any cost, ought to be in favour of this kind of thing. Surprisingly, they're often not. But this is inequalities at any cost, and this is a perfect example of where I say you can't always do that, because men and women are fundamentally different. As things stand, it's unequal. Women have a choice that men don't have. And is that fair? No, it isn't, but it's an unfairness that's a function of biology that I can't get away from, really. Whatever I try and do, however I try and engineer the system, there's going to be an unfairness in it. That's the problem with it. And so I've got to look at what's most practical. And unfortunately, how things stand is that it's most practical and most reasonable, as I see it, that if a woman wants to have an abortion, certain other factors being taken into consideration, she ought to be able to have an abortion, right? Pretty much the situation that we have in the United Kingdom right now. But I don't think that a father ought to be able to mandate a physical abortion of a baby that's in somebody else's body, and neither do I think a father ought to be able to abrogate his rights to that child, really, any more than a mother can once that child is born. Now, I know that's an inequality, because a mother can abrogate her rights before the child is born, effectively, by having an abortion, and a man doesn't have that. And I hate it when people say men get to make their choice at the point of contraception. Yeah, fuck off with that, because, well, so do women then. So let's ban abortions because women get to, that's a bollocks argument, isn't it? Let's just accept that this is an inequality. Why am I prepared to keep this inequality? Because brutally speaking, the alternative is you can go around fucking as many women as you like, having them pregnant, and it's cunts like me that's going to have to pay to bring them up, brutally speaking, via my taxes. And actually, I'd rather you paid for your mistakes than me pay for your mistakes. Now, where perhaps in the future there could be some equality is that at present you have a situation where if a woman doesn't want to pay for their 12-week-old fetus when it's born, she can have an abortion. The guy can't do the same. It's just hard shit If she wants to carry on, he's going to have to pay for it. What I would like to see in the future is, if it's a situation where she says, no, I want to have an abortion, and he says, well, actually, no, I'd like to become a father. That's my child in there. I would like to have it. Once we get the technology for artificial wombs, which I'm sure we will have in the future, where you could take that 12-week fetus out and carry it on growing in the womb, then I'd like to see a situation where that would be, if that's what the father wanted, that's what would happen. And that would then place mothers to be in the same position as fathers to be. Because then a mother to be could be in a position saying, I don't want this baby inside me anymore, I want an abortion. And the father would say, well, I don't want that, I want the baby to carry on. So it would be that fetus would go into an artificial womb, and then she would have to pay the maintenance towards him bringing that baby up, the same as he would have been paying the maintenance towards her bringing that baby up. Ultimately, that's the solution. As things stand, they should stand as they stand, if that makes any sense. Okay, let's do a couple more. Why is every content provider wants Patreon or PayPal, but no one wants to set up a nice, easy Bitcoin tip jar that doesn't involve bank accounts and credit cards and identifying information? I don't know, because I'm not every content provider, I'm only me, but I didn't even know there was such a fucking thing, and I wouldn't have a fucking clue about it, and I doubt that many people would contribute it. I'm very fortunate I have 140 wonderful people who contribute to my Patreon. PayPal, I've had maybe 2 payments via PayPal in all the time, so that one doesn't happen very often. I don't imagine many people would use the Bitcoin tips jar. 2 more, let's do 2 more, 3 more, 3 more, yes. What's your greatest hopes and fears for the future? Fucking hell. My greatest hope for the future would be that we manage to overcome our limitations as human beings, and I don't think we'll ever fully conquer them because we are biological evolved organisms, but if we could learn to acknowledge them and understand them and quantify them, then we'd have a chance of circumventing them. It's like knowing about your biases, right? If you know that you have biases towards different people, then, or that those biases are possible, that it's impossible to have subconscious biases towards people of other ethnicities or towards people of different genders. Or in my case, I always favoured Steve Ovett rather than Seb Coe as middle distance runners, because Steve Ovett was taller than Seb Coe, and I was tall and gangly as a kid. So we have all kinds of fucking biases for all kinds of reasons. If you can acknowledge them and understand them, then you can take account of them, can't you? I think that's something that we need to do on a more general basis. But that also includes accepting the fact that we are different, and then in terms of the groups that we may be different, and not shying away from that fact as well, and seeing that as politically incorrect to state that those differences could exist. What is the difference between a duck? A duck has a beak, whereas a duck has a beak. What books would you recommend? Okay, if you look back in the past, what you will find is that I've done about 3 or 4 book recommendation videos where I recommend 3 books in each video. I think they're all called something like 3 good books or 3 more good books or some shite like that, so that would give you a bit of a starting point. Right, I will now draw a line under part 1 and I'll record part 2 at a later date. I've got to go to work now. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye for now.